welcome again to yet another edition of the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and our objective is always to have an engaging and interactive civil discourse, and in so doing help develop a culture of peace and understanding through citizens' participation and dialogue. And yes, our guests are persons who express views and opinions, and as well as perspectives of their own. Sometimes may not necessarily be that of the FBN network, the Citizens Community Forum, or that of the host. And our topics are also wide-ranging. Discussions at times may be emotionally charged, but surely we can always find common ground and learn from each other, irrespective of differing views. Now, we are now into the third year of a global pandemic, and we have heard, read, and seen the myriad of economic and social pressures that have and continue to impact families and family structures. The vulnerabilities of human societies have been made more glaring, if only to judge by increased measures of social support during a pandemic. And while we look on at the global community, which as of March the 15th has been observing World Social Work Day under the global theme, Co-Building a New Eco-Social World and Leaving No One Behind, and in our local context, our theme, the time is right for social work. What about our own issues here in Trinidad and Tobago? What has been, what has been our crisis response plan been like? At this time, inside the Citizens Community Forum, we put the spotlight on social work. One area we believe must be part of that societal crisis response action plan, and the persons who work in the sector. For me, social work must be rooted in a sound human value-based system. Our topic this evening, inside the Citizens Community Forum, social work as an instrument of societal transformation. In the main, just how can social work be used for positive transformation of our societies? To help discuss the issue, I have with me Mr. Luke Sineth, a social worker in Trinidad and Tobago, connected with the Social Displacement Unit and the National Family Service Division and the Ministry of Social Development, working with such populations as returned nationals, deportees with and without serious criminal pasts, substance users, chronic street dwellers, persons who are HIV positive, the mentally ill, the elderly, and young men in conflict with the law. Mr. Sineth, good evening and welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
We are happy to have you. I wanted to sort of, first to get into the discussion at this time. Coming out of the 1930s, we are told that social work started at around in earnest, maybe around the 1980s, when academics at the university level began looking at social work management programs aimed at responding to social and human service organizations. And I think that it's safe to say that social work can simply be described as a practice-based discipline, more of a sort of a hands-on approach that treats with individuals and by extension the whole of society. But if one is to really, Mr. Sineth, strip away and put back together the term social work, what would your definition of social work be?
Well, I think you gave a remarkably accurate definition of it there. But social workers have many roles. There is the counselor, there's the mediator, the solicitor, the networker, the person who's connecting you to. You get this range in the discipline. It's also the possibilities not just to work with individuals, but individuals, couples, families, and also to do community work. And then a huge aspect that's left over of social work is that I want to say social action or activism, as also participating and make sure that systems work well for persons.
Right. So there's a kind of militancy as well that's involved. Am I correct? Or should be involved?
Well, I don't quite understand what you mean by militancy,
Meaning,
because that conjures up a lot of different things for me.
meaning that you have to be able to be strong at what you do, and consistent, and as penetrative as you possibly can, and just showing that sense of strong commitment.
Okay, yes, I follow you. Just to say that it's a solid discipline,
Hmm.
and so that there are principles that underline how we work, there are ethics to the work that we do, and and you are absolutely right. There needs to be a certain kind of resilience and forthrightness when you're doing the work.
All right, and we have a lot we want to impact to impart and impact on the program this evening, Mr. Senator. And I'm really happy to have you with us here to discuss this very important subject matter. Um, I'm looking at this as an area as well. How can social work be used as, let's say, for positive transformation of our societies? If you can just give us, maybe some bullet points or some areas you believe, this whole business, when we talk about social work, be used as a positive, transformation, transformative type of instrument.
Well, a lot of what we do in social work is transformative. The whole idea that persons come in with various, I don't want to just say issues, but um, difficulty in functioning. And the social worker's job is to bring that person close to a level of functioning in their lives, give them some coping skills to be able to deal with the challenges. And that in turn then impacts upon how they interact with other persons, how they interact with their family, how they interact on work. And so if you think about it, there are kind of several levels that we talk about in social work. There's the micro level, and the micro level really is this interpersonal. Somebody's coming into your office and you're talking to them and helping them work through an issue. There's the meso level. That's a bit in the middle of a little step up. And these are the systems that interact with the person, the school, the home, the children. That also impacts on the person. And then it's the macro level. This is like to the very top. We're looking at structures, laws that function, ministries, policies that they have. And if we can get those policies and laws to work well for the person, then that also impacts their quality of life.
All right, a very interesting point there. And having its very foundation at the community level, and the kind of philanthropy that came with that. Do you think that social work has evolved? Because I've heard the call for even greater levels of scientific and interdisciplinary solutions to, let's say, large societal issues. Do you think that social work has evolved to meet a larger societal challenge?
Almost certainly, social work has evolved and it continues to evolve. When we talk about approaching things from a scientific point of view, I mean, this is part of the essence of social work. It's not just that I think I'm a good person and I want to be a good person.
Or I'm likable. Yes.
Right. So you do have to go and see what the social studies or what the social science says about interactions, what it says about relationships, what it says about what works best for persons who might have been abused, what works best for returning nationals, deportees. What does the social science say on persons with HIV? And you really have to go and read up these things and know what you're doing in order to be able to have interaction that's meaningful, but also that can be trusted. But social work is also continuing to evolve. There's a lot of questions around just having the symposium on International Social Work Day.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that symposium a little later on. But go ahead. I'll allow you to develop that point.
Yeah. Just coming out of that, there is now a focus on not just on what is the research that is happening within social work, but what is the research that is happening within the Caribbean around social work? What are the ways that we have to invest in strategies that work best for us, that best answer the issues that we might have as small island nations or as islands? And those kinds of research and is happening now, and we are putting those things in place to be able to provide better service.
Because why I asked the question, Mr. Sunat, is that I wanted to have that focus as to someone who let's say wanting to get into the business of social work, that they not just see this as something that, okay, you have to be a likable person or somebody who's liked in the community, but more so there's a science, and there are studies, there's supposed to be a focus, so that you can deliver the kind of professional service.
That is correct. I mean, you also talked about it being an interdisciplinary approach, and I mean that is part of the essence of why the whole profession of social work came about. So you don't just have to do, have some knowledge in psychology. You have to have some knowledge in sociology. You have to have some knowledge in gender studies. You have to have some knowledge in how do you do community work. You have to have some knowledge in about the law. Because all of these things kind of come in.
Yes, they're interrelated, interconnected, yes.
Right. And so when you come into the profession, they take you along the gamut of all of those disciplines, and all of those things come together to make a good social worker.
All right, so it's really, putting it another way, it's the one thing one is asking whether the social worker as you know it today is really meeting the largest societal challenge, and of course you did answer that question. But going further, Mr. Sinnett, features that could be considered, let's say, symptoms of family disorganization, what are some of the testing instruments really that are used? What can you share with us?
Well, you can find a lot of instruments that we can use in terms of questionnaires to see how families go. But really, the essence of it, when we engage with a family member, is, does the family function? And those are the questions that you have to ask. And so we might want to say that a mother, a father, children, and being in contact with your grandparents is the best kind of family. But if the family is not functioning for itself, for the children, for the people in it, then that actually is not a functioning family, and something needs, some intervention needs to happen. So you can have a single parent who has a remarkably functional family. You can have parents who have been separated and are raising children, and you can have that co-parenting arrangement be something that is functional. You get me?
Yes. All right, so that I'm happy that you're able to delve a little further into that particular area. And at this time, we just like to remind our listeners that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and our topic, social work as an instrument of societal transformation. I have with me Mr. Luke Sinnett. Mr. Sinnett has obliged to sit with us to discuss this very, very important subject matter at this time. Mr. Sinnett, we always hear about capacity building, resilience building, and recovery, especially, coming out of a crisis or, during a pandemic, post-pandemic. When we look at other countries, for example, and, and the vulnerabilities of the times, we face, can we really successfully build capacity and resilience in the absence of the input of the social worker? Because, I get the sense that sometimes the social workers are not valued. They are undervalued in terms of their the work that they do. There are a lot of people, some people may not understand what they do. How important is the social worker in this regard?
I think absolutely important. And the thing is that you are right to say sometimes people undervalue social workers and the work that they do, and you can see that kind of replete within the system or state system, where there may not be enough social workers to service an area, or there might be a clinic that has a social work post that persons are not going to fill, because in their mind they might think, well, if I give somebody a hamper, then I'm doing social work, and by golly, the security guard outside can do that.
Yes.
But the way that we interact and intervene in persons' lives and are able to structure our treatment plans really goes towards building stronger persons, stronger families, stronger societies, and then a more resilient and emotionally robust, or emotionally somebody with good emotional range, let me say it like that. Because so very often, particularly like coming out of the pandemic, persons found that a lot of the things that they just would normally use to cope. I'm not even thinking about these important coping things, but being able to take a walk in nature, being able to meet your family, being able to go out and sweat on the field. All of these things are super important in making sure that our emotional and mental health kind of stays in check. And so when some of those things are taken away, we find that people really began to struggle and not even knowing why this was happening in their lives. There were people coming in for marriage counseling because they were in conflict with their spouse. And kind of just also not realizing, like they think like, something is wrong and not realizing that, no, we need to have different coping strategies because the ones that we had before were taken away.
Yes.
And so what we need to do is go through with them to kind of teach them new ones. And of course, like when the pandemic clears up, we can kind of go back to living our lives well.
Okay.
But so very often, and I'll give you an example. So you might have a father who, let's say he lost his job due to the pandemic. So he's home. A lot of things about how he views himself as a man. Why can't I provide? I have to now rely on my wife's salary.
Yes.
Am I respected in the home? Those feelings of frustration can then come out and, as anger and aggression. And all of a sudden, you're snapping at the children.
Right.
When really and truly, if you had a job, that just wouldn't be happening.
Right. I'm happy that you raised that point, Mr. Stinnett. I'm going to come back, to you on that very same, that very same focus that you have just, that you've just highlighted there, because there's something that I want to go into a little more, and a little deeper. But certainly, said what if you were to look at some of the areas, what have you discovered really as some of those really concerning areas as it relates to, let's say, Trinidad and Tobago, where those pressure points, are mostly felt when you speak with families? You reference a couple there, but what are some of those other pressure points?
Well, you have to realize that one of the things is that I work at National Family Services Division, and that's out of the Ministry of Social Development. And part of what that means is that the persons who are coming in with problems. Nobody's coming in there to talk about how wonderful their day was. And so the things that show up a lot is a lot of co-parenting issues, figuring out how after we separated, how to still care for the child well, issues around domestic violence, issues around child abuse, marital conflict, as in spousal conflict. If I think those are and a huge, I can't understate this, and a huge amount of people who are just struggling to put food on the table. So there are lots of financial issues that come up as well.
Right, because I was about to ask you, is it psychological, economic, and perhaps the loss of jobs, income inequality, personal family issues? I was going to ask you, where are those pressure points most felt, and you have indicated some of those there. But I want to sort of also look at historically. I'm looking at the story coming out of the Great Depression during the 1930s, for example, where there was this direct hit on family and on family structures and societies, disorganization, deprivation, poverty, what have you. Homelessness and even high levels, I mentioned poverty. Where among the major features during the Depression around the 1930s, do you believe we, having regard to our historical, looking at it in a historical sense, do you believe that in Trinidad and Tobago, we really have, let's say, a crisis plan, and if so, is that plan working? Do you think that plan, or what should that plan look like for us in 2022?
We really have to think about how do we implement a social safety net for citizens in this country. And these are things that we're kind of grappling with. I think that particularly the government is mindful of it, and they've been making great strides in doing that. And so I know that the intention is to take on more social workers, so the National Family Service Division office, but put more social workers out in the field so that persons can have better access. But of course, the social safety net does not just include having a social worker around.
Mm.
It does include being able to have good access to healthcare, good access to education, and good access to other social services that the government offers. And the better that we can have those things be functioning at their best, it's the better that persons are able to fall when they fall to land in that social safety net. Because it's not going to be that we're not going to have problems. I
Right.
mean, there's no way for me to predict that there's not going to be a next pandemic. There's no way to
Okay.
predict that, you know, I'm not going to fall and break my leg and all of a sudden can't work. You can't predict these things, but the social safety net needs to be there.
And interestingly, again, Mr. Sinet, you know, I was going to ask you again, referencing, you know, the Great Depression, you know, looking at those stories, those horrific stories coming out of that era in the United States, you know, and I was going to ask, are you fearful, you know, we could be facing a similar global scenario with a greater call and demand for a new kind of social intervention?
I wouldn't say that I'm fearful. I would say that um, when when we look back at history, we can learn lessons, and so I'm hopeful for that, and also I'm also intrigued by the possibility of being able to, of where the social profession is evolving, and so
Oh,
those things
to
excite
rise to
me.
the occasion, yes. Uh-huh.
Right, and so even now, even us as social workers, we have to pay attention to when we're talking with ourselves, to begin to ask ourselves, like, where are the gaps and where do we need to step in and fill those gaps in terms of social in the country? And those kind of conversations are happening. And so I'm hopeful for those things. When I know that we talk about sorry, I know that you're kind of referencing the Great Depression and kind of what happened to society after that. And I think that those lessons are some of the ones that we're implementing now. And so oh dear, where am I going with this? I was going to reference some of the stuff that the Ministry of Social Development had announced for Social Work Day. Yeah, it'll come back to me.
Yeah. Right. So, you know, again, we are seeing, you're saying that that there are lessons learned, you know, and we ought to be able to have a focus, and that which would have occurred obviously would you know, be a good starting point, you know, in terms of our policies and our plans going forward. Now, the Ministry of Social Development, I know, you know, the celebration there, observance of, you know, World Social Work Day, and if you can just share with us what were some of the highlights that actually came out. Now, I did see one plan by the ministry to have an award being given, I think it's in 2023, to someone, or maybe an individual award, you know, for Social Work Day, someone who would have given service, you know, to both the community and you know, national service, as it were. What were some of the other highlights that actually came out of you know, that observance from the ministry, I believe, which was on the 15th, was it?
Well, World Social Work Day was on the 15th. The symposium was on the 17th of March. But to say the symposium was I guess the flagship event. There were several events that were happening around. They did some posts in social media. They had some interactions with some young men in Naparima, boys. They created some videos of some production stuff that they put out. But the symposium was really the flagship. And at the symposium, it really was, again, social workers coming together to look at what is happening now and to be able to address the issues that are happening and to make some kind of prediction of what do we need to do to be able to better service the population. So I know we looked at the evolution of social work was one of the topics that we spoke about. The other was the self. Like, because we are social workers, we use ourselves to do the work a lot of the time. And how can we make proper investment in self to make sure that we are more resilient as a person, that our motivation is intact, and that we really care for ourselves well. and have a good sense of self, because that is how we're going to be able to engage people's lives well. The other thing we looked at was social work education, and I kind of brought this up earlier, where UWE is really taking a focus on when we're doing research, to do research on the Caribbean, but also Caribbean people doing research on the Caribbean. So it's kind of like you don't want to be that person who is outside of the house looking into the window trying to explain to everybody else what's going on,
or to change the system. Yes.
Right. if 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 you can be inside of the house having the conversations with persons, then that's the better way to operate. So Caribbean not fairest, what is it? Caribbean social work researchers need to do work on the Caribbean and within the Caribbean, and then let that inform how we teach and what we prepare the next generation of social workers for. The last thing that we looked at was this whole notion of gender, and how does gender play into how we operate as social workers and how we engage with other persons. Because the social profession is heavily weighted with female social workers, and so there are very, very few male social workers in the profession. What does that mean when we have to engage men who are coming in for help? People who want to be able to see somebody across and believe that I know that you understand what I'm talking about, because you would have lived it as well. And so we also had that conversation.
Is there an issue? Do you see an issue there, Mr. Sinnett, in terms of that that gender balance, which appears to be uneven? You reference more social, female social workers being in the system. Are there challenges there in terms of getting, to the root of some of those issues that we face, in terms of treating with some of those issues and responding? Because you rightly said that sometimes you may have a preference. Let's say a male may have a particular issue, and he prefers to to share and to talk with I suppose someone of his own gender, as opposed to a female. Are there issues? Do you see that there have been issues there?
I would say, to start off my response, sorry, I would start off by saying that as social workers, we trust the science. And so if you're engaging somebody, we're not engaging it from happenstance. We're not engaging them from, let me see how I feel about you if my blood take you. It really is about, what does the literature say about persons in abusive relationships, males who might be in abusive relationships, or females? What does the literature say about what kind of intervention is needed for a person who might have a chronic disease and is experiencing some depression? And so there is a certain amount of trust, I think, that clients should feel when they come in, that the social worker before them knows what they're doing. But there is that there is the nuance, as you were saying, that when someone comes in, it changes the dynamic if they can feel that the person opposite them understood.
Yes.
And not just understands, but I'll give you an example. I had a client. It was a woman who was in a domestic violence situation. The husband was being very, very abusive towards her, and she was in the process of leaving him. And I step into the counseling room, and instantly, as I step in, she says, "No, I don't want him." And with complete humility, I had to kind of step back and go, you know what? Maybe a female social worker should come in and do this session, because maybe I'm not the right person for it. And I could appreciate that. So those things are the subtle things, or the nuanced ways that gender influences the work that we do, that I'm trying to bring out.
I suppose one of the challenges,
a lot of these skills that we learn in social work, what might be considered soft skills, and it's not a traditional that we engage men in these kind of soft skills, or cultivate these soft skills with the men in our society. So there's a lack of attraction, first of all, to social work. Also, to be quite honest, what came out in symposium was also just about how much social workers get paid. If men looking at the profession might be thinking, I need to be making plenty more figures than that, so maybe that profession is not the best for me. Where there might be a cap on the upward mobility
Okay, I hear you.
that you can aspire to, where it makes the profession a little less attractive.
All right, I hear you, Mr. Sinnett, and we're going to, talk a bit more. But we just want to remind our listeners and our viewers that this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic, social work as an instrument of societal transformation. And I have with me Mr. Luke Sinnett. And Mr. Sinnett, a social worker in Trinidad and Tobago, connected with the Social Displacement Unit, the National Family Service Division and the Ministry of Social Development, working with such populations as returned nationals, deportees, and with and without serious criminal past, substance users, chronic street dwellers, persons who are HIV positive, the mentally ill, the elderly, and young men in conflict with the law. Mr. Sinnett, we have to take a short break now, and when we come back, we will continue the discussion.
You tell me something, Mr. Cummings. You are seeing asparagus selling in one of those high-end supermarkets. We can't see local tomatoes. So then we come in, we spin it up in mud. I'm not talking about them farmers in Busup, Marino, and Old Vans, or they're only complaining about land and they want land out of... No.
You know something that bothers me? People want change and cannot get it peacefully. They resort to violence in order to get that change. Look at the history of the world, and you see that is what is taking place.
The difference is that a country like the United States could simply print money, trillions of dollars of support, social support, business support. They're talking about another $2 trillion. So they could print money. We can't do that. If we do that, then we get inflation. So our deficit is problematic.
2011, which I looked at, and that actually came out of the Central Statistical Office. Do we have any updated data?
Actually, I was very impressed by your statistical knowledge, Mr. Cummings. Yes, the last census was in 2011, and there would have been population and housing estimates subsequently, and the figures remain about the same.
What are some of those other pressure points?
Persons who are coming in with problems. Nobody's coming in there to talk about how wonderful their day was. And so the things that show up a lot is a lot of co-parenting issues, figuring out how, after we separated, how to still care for the child well, issues around domestic violence, issues around child abuse.
Discussions on health, leadership, governance, crime, education, and social justice. Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m. The Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and we are talking social work as an instrument of societal transformation. And I have with me Mr. Luke Sinnett, a social worker in Trinidad and Tobago. And we are continuing our discussion. Mr. Sinnett, welcome back. Now, again, I want to go back, to that period. Forgive me, I'm a student of history, and I want to go back to that period, 1929 to 1931, 1930s, in the main. And it is said that the number of children entering custodial institutions in the United States, we were told, increased by some 50%. And in many economically deprived families, children were found to have suffered the most. And do we have a sense of our own situation here in Trinidad and Tobago, let's say coming out from 2 years of a pandemic?
I don't have that kind of information, so I would want to speak to it with some kind of subtlety. But to give any kind of facts, I just kind of don't have those. At National Family Services, it's adults and parents. It's very little work with children. A lot of the cases with children go to the Children's Authority or to child welfare.
All right. Well, I suppose that's something that maybe even the University of the West Indies can be looking at, and our tertiary, level institutions can probably, we may be able to probably get some a clearer picture from those types of institutions as to where we are, because they're the ones that I suppose that are charged with the responsibility of research and so in the main, right? right? So I guess that's something that we can always come back to. But in what can be referenced as well, or referred to as the traditional concepts of gender roles, and we did make reference to that a little earlier on, and I did indicate that I wanted to come back to this. Gender roles prevailed again during the 1930s, and in your work as a social worker, are men seen to be more impacted than women? Is it the reverse, or are they all on the same level in being able to respond to social pressures? Let me add: are men better at responding to social pressures than women? What have you found?
Well, I found that it's less helpful to make a kind of comparison, as in, does one do it better, does one do it worse, but rather to approach it from the context of what are the different ways that men experience social pressures and what are the different ways that women experience social pressures and how to respond to those. We know for certain that women are more impacted by domestic violence, they're more impacted by sexual violence, and girls as well, and they're more impacted economically when social structures fall apart.
Right.
And so, a lot of women have to go back home to take care of the children because we on the Zoom. The children are on Zoom and they need supervision. You have to figure out, if you're not doing that, how to get the money to be able to pay for somebody to come and stay there with the children,
or even the internet bill. Yes.
All right, and things like that. Yeah, and so there are ways that that huge societal challenges impact men and women differently. And the question, of course, is how do we interrogate what are those impacts and how do we mitigate them?
All right. So again, another challenge. And again, let me put a scenario here, Mr. Sinnett. There were stories that unemployed men simply felt, and again, referencing an earlier point that you raised. There were stories that unemployed men simply felt, like failures, emasculated, if you will, having to depend on welfare, and as a result of their inability to provide for their families, and even seen to have strong links to, and you referenced it, to domestic violence within the home. And I'm seeing where, it is also said that unemployed men often found themselves hanging around the homes, irritating their wives, where quarrels became more frequent between husbands and wives, and even often result in fatalities. At times men and even women withdraw emotionally, I'm told, and even physically from their families and friends. And is that a good picture of what has been happening in the society today?
That's a good picture to paint. But not say a good picture to paint, sorry, that's a good analysis, sorry. And so we did have a lot more persons coming into National Family Services, couples coming in for couples counseling, because there was so much aggression happening in the home. And this is not even in those areas where somebody might have lost a job, either the guy as the breadwinner or the woman. These were just in general, persons were kind of frustrated and it had that negative impact on their family. And that kind of withdrawal that you talk about most certainly did happen. There were a lot of people who thought, well, people home, you're home with your family, you're home with your spouse, you have all this time together, that should be a benefit, when it turned out to actually not be a benefit. If you did not have the kind of communication skills that can withstand those kind of pressures, if you didn't have the emotional intelligence or emotional wherewithal that can withstand that kind of pressure, then it only meant that all of those things are now almost like in a petri dish, and so it's like a powder keg waiting to explode. And so we did find that there were a lot of those kinds of experiences happening, and persons coming in for things that generally they might have sat down and talked about home and being able to get past.
Right. Very, very interesting point there again, and it tells me as well, Mr. Sinnett, that there is need for, concrete, what I would probably call as well, clinical, data study in Trinidad and Tobago, that can tell us, for example, the number of children entering custodial institutions, child labor, single parent units, substance abuse, having to treat with families of various classes, ethnicities, and so on. Now, I'm sure that, we may have bits and pieces of this kind of information, but that might be splintered, around the different institutions. The family court might have some, social, development, Ministry of Social Development might have some, the universities might have some, but I'm still sensing that we are probably yet to get a kind of, full picture as to where we are in Trinidad and Tobago. Is this something that you would want to see as well, in a sort of a cohesive, and not have what I call a silos type of data mining, as it were?
Right. So we are in the era of big data, and I think some of these things should be things that we have at our fingertips. The ministry, at least in Ministry of Social Development, they're now looking to I don't know if the word is computerize or digitize the way that they mine their data. And so it should be possible for, at least in our ministry, across the various divisions, that you input the information into a computer system, and then anybody can kind of pull that down. You kind of draw down the total at the end of the day, and you can get very succinctly
real-time
what's happening.
data. Yes.
Right. They're also looking at crossing that with other ministries and other persons that do the kind of work that we do. So maybe Children's Authority, maybe the courts, but those things are they're trying to work through the glitches and the kinks in the system, because of course, nobody wants to think that all my information is out there for everybody to see. And so it's, how do we restrict the personal data that you might have an interaction with a counselor or a client, but have a certain kind of demographic data that goes out there, so that we can actually make decisions about what is happening in the country in real time. You want to be able to know that persons from a particular area consistently show up over and over and over with a particular kind of social issue. It means that what you then have to do is focus on that area with a very specific
response.
And we want to be able to know this.
And have a specific response plan, or even a rescue plan, as it were, depending on the severity and the nature of the issue. It may one that is close to maybe something that is fatal, so you would want to have an immediate response plan. But also, Mr. Senat, when we look at the pandemic more specifically, and the impact on families and social systems, how do you believe this pandemic has really shown up social work in your view? We have not had a situation like this. This is something that it is very, very novel. I think the last pandemic we had was we talked about the swine flu, way back. How has this pandemic, really shown up the work of social workers, and such as what the things that you do?
Yeah, the pandemic has, I think, where there were cracks, they've now shown up those cracks to be huge crevices. Or is that crevices and crack? I don't know. It's bigger.
Yes.
And so all of the ways that persons who are vulnerable might have been slipping through those cracks, it is now a case where persons who may not have been vulnerable have now been vulnerabilized, of being close to the brink of being vulnerable, and now require social services. And it has made us begin to think about, again, I kind of brought this up, how do we create a robust social safety net to be able to catch those persons that, as they say, might fall through the cracks. And for a lot of persons who already, just kind of holding on by a thread, it completely decimated them. And you also have to think about not just the things that the small things that were taken away, being able to connect with family, being able to socialize, being able to have stress relievers, being able to enjoy yourself. Like we couldn't go carnival, just have some kind of enjoyment in your life, because those things matter. We take that for granted, but it matters. We also had a situation where the real serious ones, where persons will, loss of income, and how does that affect how the family operates. And of course, the biggest one is that we lost real people. We
Yes.
lost with people who died from COVID, and all the people that are around them are affected. You might have been somebody's co-worker, and now all of a sudden on the job,
Yes.
it's a sense of
Loss and you know,
yes, it's intense loss.
privation. Yes.
Somebody's family, somebody's mother, somebody might have lost a child. I often think about how dire it is for somebody to have to lose their child. And if you know you lost your child due to COVID, there's a sense of anger and frustration and deep grief and loss that comes with that. And how do we then get over that?
Right.
So one of the things that that we did have to think about and grapple with in National Family Services is how do we create a program that addresses this grief and loss? Because what we're having now is a collective kind of loss and grief that is going to affect the country moving forward. It's not just simple as in my family, I lost someone and I have to get over it. Really and truly, when it is a whole community that's being affected, those things transfer into how we live our lives out in the future, and how we approach situations, how whether or not we approach a challenge, whether or not we want to take a risk, whether or not we might take a job that we like versus a job that we want,
Yes.
whether you allow your children to go out. I was like, no, but you all can't do any of those things anymore. All of those things are affected, but those things really come down to giving you the quality of life that you want to live. And so we need to think very seriously about that, and how do we we had to create these grief and loss programs
Right.
that we used with the clients of other institutions and with individual clients.
Right. I'm sure quite a lot of work there. And this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. Our topic: social work as an instrument of societal transformation. I have with me Mr. Luke Sinat, and he is a social worker in Trinidad and Tobago, connected with the Families Services Division, Ministry of Social Development, and working with such populations as returned nationals, deportees with and without serious criminal past, substance users, chronic street dwellers, persons who are HIV positive, the mentally ill, the elderly, and young men in conflict with the law. Mr. Sinat, should social work only be seen as the work of charitable or religious entities, or should social work be the business of everyone? Because there's been a narrative that when you look at the church, when you look at religious and faith-based organizations, they're the ones that are usually seen, giving out the hampers and feeding the homeless and what have you. So just should this business of social work only be confined to those those sectors of the society?
Well, I would say first up that social work is most certainly not confined to any sector. One of the things that came out in our symposium is that social work is one of the only professions that goes across the board in every other profession. And so that you're in healthcare, there's a medical social worker. In psychiatric care, there's a psychiatric social worker. The community development, there are community social workers.
Yes.
You are in the oil field and trade industry, there's a social worker there at the EPA. You know what I mean? And so it's entirely possible that persons who are in religious institutions can be kind, can be philanthropic.
Yes.
But because the work of the social worker encompasses so much more, it is really it's not the most accurate thing to say that it's confined to those
those particular specific institutions.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, because I thought it was important to mention that as well, because when you think about social work, one automatically thinks about the religious, faith-based institutions, and working with that, in that charitable way. I mean, we even hear about institutions such as the Rotary Club. We hear about the Salvation Army. and so many of those, institutions that continue, to do very good work in that particular, sector as well. On a personal level, Mrs. Sinnett, you know, are there benefits, or were there benefits? Has social work changed you in any way? Made you more perhaps inwardly looking? Having better insight and understanding of people?
Almost certainly. You can't not go through all of the topic, not I don't want to say topics, the areas of discipline that requires you to be a social worker without having some kind of introspection, without having some appreciation for, oh, wait, that is why I'm like, I'll give you why I'm like that. I'll give you an example. So I am the middle child in my family, and there are a lot of ways that I might be described by my parents. But it wasn't until you begin to do the work of the psychoanalysts and you realize, oh, wait, no. Middle children typically behave in this particular kind of way. So that gives you some insight, yeah? But then that's just more on a more comical note, but there are varying ways that when you interact with the theories, that you begin to learn things about yourself. Also, it is super important. Now, this is not a mandatory, but it is so super important that as a worker, as persons in the helping profession, that we take care of ourselves. We do what they call self-care. And I know that's another thing that's been happening for Social Work Month, as we kind of taking it on in the ministry, where they've now gotten, I think, Families in Action. Don't quote me on that because I'm not certain, but they've gotten sessions for social workers to go and debrief and be able to, get to do the work, to be able to come back to help others. Like my cup have to be full for me to be able to give, some. You understand, man? And so it is so important that we are emotionally strong, so that we can then be emotionally strong for our clients. So it makes a lot of sense.
It's instructive that you responded in that way, Ms. Sinnett, because my next question was going to be, how difficult is it to detox? At the end of the day, having to treat with a myriad of social issues from persons that sometimes could impact on your personal space mentally.
Yeah, very, very true. I think that's, well, I was talking about this just now. Doing the self-care helps you to be emotionally strong and psychologically strong. And that's one of the tips that help you. But also being able to turn off at the end of the day. You do have to realize too that you have a life, and you are 100% responsible for living your life. And so therefore it can't be that you are spending all of your time trying to be in other people's lives. The other thing that you have to realize too as social workers is that people are also 100% responsible for living their life. And if you continuously have to step into somebody's life to give them a fix, then it means that person has not learned the coping skills. They haven't learned the strategies, and therefore you may not have done your job as a social worker. We need to be able to give them those strategies so that the next time a challenge comes in their lives, they have the strategies to be able to address it. And so it shouldn't have to be that every time you need $1, you're coming back.
All right. Okay.
And so,
right.
I just wanted to finish by saying that oh dear, no, you go ahead, because I think the thought just went off my mind.
Okay, we hopefully it will come back. Well, we do have we just have a few minutes again before we close the interview. But I just wanted to get in quickly just one or two questions before we close the program. There is a narrative, Mr. Sinnett, a stigma attached to social work or to a social worker, that of let's say taking away children, and I know that you work have sort of connectivity with the court and the legal system. Taking away children that connects our intermediary between the family, the social society, and the courts, our judicial system, for example. How do you respond to such and in what way can you defend the rights of what you do? Because as I said, the narrative is there that when you hear about a social worker, one of the immediate things that comes to mind has to do with children and that sort of a punitive approach. Certainly, there has to be more than just what you do, and sort of looking at that aspect of it, because certainly you do have to interface with families, you do have to interface with children, and sometimes the intervention is necessary that would warrant even the courts coming in.
Right. And it's very much a legal thing. If a child is in danger, I think the state they have to act. Excuse me. And so that a child might have to be removed from a family because it might be some sort of abuse that is happening.
Yes.
But this really comes down to a legal thing. I think the role of the social workers in those instances would be we step in many times to try and mend the family back together. So it's working with the parents for them to understand, what punishment really looks like, and what borders on abuse, what are the different ways that you can use to help raise this child so the child is functional, what works best for children, what makes them flourish and work better, what might be the issues that you are having as a couple that you need to get addressed so that you don't then bleed some of that frustration and violence on down to the children. Maybe you all need to separate. Whatever the issue is, the social worker's job then is to equip the persons in those instances with some skills to be able to mend the family back, and also, of course, to work with the children. When you're somebody who's been abused, there's so many ways that just interrupts your ability to function socially, that needs to get repaired. Because if that psychological healing and repairing does not happen, you carry that all into your life, into your future relationships, into your job, into how maybe you might raise your children.
Yes, influences your future. No, undoubtedly. All right. Mr. Sinnett, we have to end the program at this time. I have to end the interview, but before we go, I just want if you can just give us some closing remarks. What would you like to say to Trinidad and Tobago, the region, by extension the world, whoever and wherever they're picking us up? We have just come out, and I think to a certain extent we are still celebrating, Social Work Day here in Trinidad and Tobago. What would your single message be?
Oh, I would love that more persons can then look into the profession of social work, try and become a social worker, because of course our country needs it. It's a possibility. There is a huge possibility that if we implement the right social changes and the right social, as I say, creating that social safety net, that is entirely possible. We can build a resilient, emotional, intelligent, and more mentally sound or mentally resilient people. And I think that's important. Reach out to your social worker. Our number for the National Family Service Division, 623-2608. Our extensions at head office are 6701 right up to 6710.
All right.
Reach out to a social worker.
Give us those numbers again for persons who may want to just have a re-listen.
Great. So just one more time, you get us at the ministry's number 623-2608, and the extensions for National Family Services are 6701 to 6710.
All right, there we are. Mr. Luke Sinnett, thank you so much for being with us on the Citizens Community Forum. It has been a pleasure.
Certainly on my side too.
Mr. Luke Sinnett, there are a social worker in Trinidad and Tobago, connected with the Families Division, Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, working with such populations as returned nationals, deportees with and without serious criminal pasts, substance users, chronic street dwellers, persons who are HIV positive and mentally ill, the elderly, and young men in conflict with the law. Very, very important subject matter as we continue to observe Social Work Day here in Trinidad and Tobago. This is something that happens every year. It's an annual observance. But before we go on the Citizens Community Forum, the legacy of the 1930s and the Depression in the United States, as using one example, is one that would stay with me. And perhaps Also, as I said before, being a student of history, perhaps the major positive aspect of this legacy is the idea that the social, economic security and welfare of the family should always be a fundamental national goal. I'm Stephen Cummings. This has been the Citizens Community Forum. See you next Wednesday. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.